Most would say they want control over their own lives. Now, in the democracy we live in within the United States, people have the right to vote, but they themselves do not have the right to vote on every position there is available, which includes the justices of the Supreme Court. Now, this is an issue because these justices participate in life tenure, which U.S. legal defines as a term of office which survives for the official's lifetime until and unless she or he chooses to resign or can be removed from office under extraordinary circumstances. I am here to speak on the behalf of the 77% of Americans, which is based off the poll done by PSB of this year, 2020, who are in favor of restrictions of the amount of time that a justice can serve. I am here to advocate for change for what is in place. Because I am an American citizen who is affected by the rulings made by the Supreme Court, such as the famous court case of 1973, Roe v. Wade, I feel that having the most qualified and most representative justices on the Supreme Court is crucial for everyone, including myself. Due to the fact that there is currently no limit on how long a justice can serve on the Supreme Court, most justices serve until their death or until an older age when they retire. Instead, there should be a limit on the amount of time so that they don't experience problems such as mental decrepitude, which is a mental decline. To add on, if a justice does not have a limit and serves well into their older age, which is how it is currently in place, it is likely that the rulings that they are a part of will not be representative of the current or newer generations once they do hit their older ages. And being representative of this country, of these people, and of their needs is crucial. For these reasons, Supreme Court justices should have term limits. Because there is currently no limit on the amount of time that a Supreme Court justice can serve, this usually means that a justice serves until their death or until an older age when they retire. Now, this can be a problem because due to the fact that these Supreme Court justices do stay on the court when they are older and well into their older years and older ages, this means that they are more likely to experience a mental decline or a mental decrepitude, which can be an issue. Now, if we do implement term limits, there will be less possibilities of justices experiencing problems with mental decrepitude, which could be important because it has to do with their judgment. Now, in the Journals of Gerontology, Series B, Volume 57, the authors and researchers wrote that cognitive decline may begin after midlife, but most often occurs at higher ages, such as 70 or higher. Now, if we take a look at the current Supreme Court justices and the Supreme Court justices who have passed away, we see that these justices serve for almost their entire life, and they do hit that mark where a mental decline and a cognitive decline does become apparent. Not only is the possible experience with mental decrepitude something that needs to be taken into consideration, but the importance of how representative and mirror-like the justices are of the public is also important. Term limits could be important because it could lead to justices being more likely to be representative of the current or new generations in the United States. Now, as mentioned earlier, justices serve up until their death or retirement, which means that they serve a good amount of time at older ages on the Supreme Court. Now, this can be an issue or it could be a problem when there is an issue brought to the Supreme Court case that affects a certain group of people, such as younger generations and younger groups of people. Now, thankfully, the ruling of the Supreme Court case of Obergefell v. Hodges of 2015 ruled that same-sex couples did have the right to marriage. And this was partly due to the fact that the justices that were in favor of this included some justices who were younger ages, including Sonia Sotomayor, as well as Elena Kagan. Younger generations were the people who showed greater support and were more open to talk about this group of LGBTQ+, which showed that this was something that was extremely important to this new generation of people. Now, luckily, there were enough justices that voted in favor of this ruling, but there could be times when younger generations do also experience issues or problems that need support from the Supreme Court, which is why it is crucial that these Supreme Court justices are representative of the younger generations and the current issues, because times and issues are constantly changing. It's important to realize that these 9 justices have much influence over important aspects of people's lives, which is why it can be seen as important, if not crucial, that these justices are representative of the current or new and upcoming public, which is why justices should not serve throughout their older ages.
You've mentioned a few times how we cannot vote, and I'm assuming you mean the American people cannot vote for their choice of the Supreme Court justices. And that is the case because in the Constitution, in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, it states that Supreme Court justices are nominated by the President and with advice and consent from the Senate. So it states clearly in the Constitution that we the people don't have the power to vote for the Supreme Court justices that we would like, and it's actually appointed by the President with help from the Senate. Having term limits and being able to vote for a Supreme Court justice is 2 completely different things. Having term limits just limits the time that they are able to serve on the Supreme Court, whereas you kept mentioning how we the people are not able to vote and use our voices to speak up for the candidates that we want in the Supreme Court. And that's a completely different thing. That's not what term limits are about, because at the end of the day, they're still going to be appointed by the President with help from the Senate. You mentioned a lot about mental declines, and while yes, that can occur in older generations, all of these Supreme Court justices are appointed by the President. They have to go through a hearing at the Senate, and they have to win majority vote in the Senate to be able to be appointed to these positions in the Supreme Court justice. So that just probably goes to show that the Senate and the President thought that they were well fit for that position, which is how they got to where they are, the Supreme Court. There are also no qualifications to be a Supreme Court justice stated in the Constitution besides like residency or citizenship. In light of the new bill being proposed, named the Supreme Court Justice Term Limits and Regular Appointments Act of 2020, it states that a vacancy due to death, disability, or removal will allow the most recent senior justice to fill in that position until a new justice is appointed in the Supreme Court. Now, my question is, if the Senate pushes back on the hearing of a new nominee, and the recent senior justice is still in that position past their allotted term limit, how would that work? Wouldn't you agree that the bill is flawed with loopholes for justices to remain in their position?
We the people must look at many different factors when determining whether or not there should be a term limit on the justices of the Supreme Court. The important factors that we need to take into consideration is the difference of the average amount of years spent as a justice on the Supreme Court from when it was first established in 1789 up until now. Not only do we look at the change in time, but also what the pressing issues that are brought to the Supreme Court case and how those issues have also changed drastically over time. Because of the pressing issues and the fundamental rights that are at stake, we must have term limits. Because of the average years that these justices do serve on the Supreme Court, we need to realize that they are likely to have mental declines, such as mental decrepitude. And because of these terms, which last their whole life or until retirement, they are likely to be old of age for a long period of their term, which means that it is likely that they are not representative and they don't mirror what is crucial to the generations that are currently in place in society in the United States. For these reasons, Supreme Court justices should have term limits.
Ever since Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, the talks of having a Supreme Court term limit has been a hot topic as of late. Recently, Democrats in the House of Representatives have proposed a new law called the Supreme Court's Term Limit and Regular Appointments Act of 2020. This bill calls for the Supreme Court justices to serve 18-year term limits and will allow each presidency to nominate or appoint at least one new Supreme Court justice. Now you may think this is a fantastic idea, but it may not be as fantastic as you think. Having term limits can deepen the divide in our nation and politicize the courts. Not to mention, nowhere in the Constitution does it state that the Supreme Court justices have or should have term limits. There's a lot of talk about implementing term limits in the Supreme Court, but having term limits is not in the Constitution. Term limits are not stated in the Constitution, and only a small portion of those who are unsatisfied with the appointment of justices are demanding for change. Term limits for the Supreme Court justices are not stated in the Constitution, unlike the presidency, which is stated very clearly. In Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, it clearly states, "The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation, which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office." We often interpret the terms good behavior as lifetime terms. If the Supreme Courts were to have time limits, the Founding Fathers could have stated that in the Constitution, but they didn't, which we can assume that those positions are for life, unless stated otherwise. Research done by the Pew Research Center showed that 70% of Americans expressed a favorable opinion of the Supreme Court, while only 29% had an unfavorable view. This just goes to show that most Americans are already satisfied with the Supreme Court. Only a small percentage of Americans are unsatisfied with it. So, is implementing term limits going to make the Supreme Court better if majority of Americans are already in favor of it the way it is? Not only is it not stated in the Constitution for Supreme Court justices to have term limits, but it will also divide the nation. Having term limits for the Supreme Court justices will further deepen the divide between parties and politicize the courts. The Supreme Court is already supposed to be independent and not to be swayed or catered to any political party. Without having term limits, it terminates external pressures and possible lobbyists. According to the Supreme Court's official website, it states, "To ensure an independent judiciary and to protect judges from bipartisan pressures, the Constitution provides that judges serve during good behavior, which generally meant life terms. To further assure their independence, the Constitution provides that judges' salaries may not be diminished while they are in office." The Supreme Court is supposed to be independent, and having new justices can throw the court off balance if they are swayed towards one political party or bought by people with money and or people with power. In the Supreme Court's Term Limits Act, it states, "The President shall, during the first and third year after a year in which there is a presidential election, nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, appoint one justice of the Supreme Court." The presidential election will be more of a fight for power if there is also a Supreme Court justice seat to be appointed by the next president. This will make people more divided because the president has the power to appoint someone to such a high position and with a lot of power in decision making. Considering how divided our nation was this presidential election, I can't imagine a next presidential election with a Supreme Court justice seat to be appointed by the president.
I would like to start off by reflecting on what you stated. You stated, "Nowhere in the Constitution does it state that the Supreme Court justices have or should have term limits." This is true. I agree with you, and anyone else who is familiar with the Constitution, it would also agree with you because it is written and it is a fact and it is set in stone. Although we are not here to argue or to discuss what is already written and what already is a fact. We know that this is a fact. We know that this is written in the Constitution. But we are here to question whether or not change should be brought to this because it was written such a long time ago. We are here to question whether this is still something that applies to our society today or it doesn't. That is what we are here to talk about. Now, going along with what I just stated, The Supreme Court was established in 1789, which most would consider quite a while ago. So this means not only has time passed, but also there have been changes within the Supreme Court, one being the average amount of time that a justice would generally serve. Calvis Goldie, a writer for the SCOTUS blog, explained that the average amount of years that a Supreme Court justice would generally serve up until Richard Nixon's presidency was around 15 years. And according to the writers of Fix-A-Court, the average amount of years since then that a Supreme Court justice now serves is about 28 years, which is quite a difference. Not only is the average amount of time that these justices would serve something that we the people should look at, but also we should take a look at the differences in the issues that came to the Supreme Court. For example, much more pressing issues regarding civil rights have come to the Supreme Court over the past few years. For example, Roe v. Wade, which made it legal for a woman to have abortions if needed. Also, Obergefell v. Hodges, which gave same-sex couples the right to marriage. Now, these rights are things that our society has come to be more open about and wanting more of this right, which were not seen when the Supreme Court was established in 1789, because these issues, which were civil rights issues, did not come to the Supreme Court case. So there is a big difference in what the Supreme Court deals with, which is why we need to take into consideration what these changes and differences are, because there is a lot of differences. You mentioned in your argument how in the Constitution it clearly states that the president, for example, has its own term limit. Now, I have a question for you. We know that presidents, people who are senators, governors, they'll have term limits. Now, I ask you personally, do you think that it is appropriate for there to be term limits on every other position except for this one? And why so? Because for me, it does not make much sense for this one position, a Supreme Court justice, to not have a term limit, while other positions do have term limits. When you discuss the new bill that the Democratic Party has proposed, which it has to do with term limits, specifically an 18-year term limit for justices on the Supreme Court, you stated that there could be loopholes around this, which would allow for Supreme Court justices who have previously already been a justice to continue and stay on the Supreme Court. Now I ask you, what exact loopholes are you referring to?
As for me personally, I think that having term limits is maybe not so bad of an idea after all, but for the sake of this debate and my side of the argument, I will have to argue no, that term limits are just not good for us. It will over-politicize the courts, which is something that we do not want, and it would just make the presidential elections, if the bill that was proposed passes, it will make the presidential election much more of a power grab, because now you have two powerful positions at stake. Term limits will not help mend the divide between two parties, nor will it stop politicizing the courts. Term limits sound great and all, but whether it can really give us the results that people are asking for is not entirely possible. Term limits will divide the parties further and make elections more of a battle for power. It also exposes the Supreme Court to external pressures and can lose their so-claimed independence. Not to mention that the new bill proposed to implement term limits is flawed. There can be loopholes to get around it and allow previous Supreme Court justices continue to serve. These changes are brought on by people who are so opposed to the recent appointments in the Supreme Court and are looking for a way to make.
It is crucial to reflect on just how much power and influence that these justices of the Supreme Court case have. One must remember that these people should be qualified, which partly refers to their health and the possibility of having issues with mental decrepitude or mental decline, and they should be representative of the public. These are the reasons why Supreme Court justices should have term limits. Most want control over their own life, And although you and I and the public cannot elect and appoint a justice to the Supreme Court, we could support the need for a term limit because there are chances that there could be a justice who negatively impacts our life. This is why term limits could be important because we, the people, might get stuck with a justice who makes decisions that harm us in our community, and they might make these decisions for the rest of their lives. We, the people, should not experience the possibility of being harmed by the decisions that someone else, for the rest of their lives, might make for us.